We'll be starting in 1 minute. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us for this Steinway Sons webinar in online instruction. Our previous webinar on this topic drew quite a crowd and left the audience wanting more. Namely, they wanted to be able to see an online instructor and the actual online setup. So we're having this follow-up webinar on online instruction today with a review for beginners and then onward to a deeper dive. We know that there are piano teachers worldwide desperate in these difficult times to transition to remote online instruction. And there are students out there nearly equally desperate to continue that instruction. So our goal today, following this webinar, is that teachers will leave more confident in their ability to give online music lessons. This webinar is part of the Steinway Teacher Educational Program, also known as STEP. If you're a music educator and would like to find out more about STEP, please visit steinway.com/education/STEP. We are anticipating a 45-minute webinar with a break at the middle and at the end for questions. If you would like to submit a question, you may do so now through Zoom. We, of course, won't get to all of them, but we will certainly answer what we can. Steinway will be hosting our next webinar Wednesday, April 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. This will be a masterclass by Steinway artist Christopher O'Reilly, a classical pianist and arranger and former host of the national public radio show From the Top. Please complete the 2-minute survey at the conclusion of this webinar to let us know which additional topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Let me introduce myself and our panelists, and we'll get to it. I am your moderator and host, Ben Finane, editor-in-chief at Steinway Sons. My purview includes the Steinway Owners Magazine, a print piece, as well as the online music magazine, listenmusicculture.com. I'm also the producer and host of Soundboard, the official Steinway Sons podcast on artistry and craftsmanship. Our panelist is J.Y. Song, who is founder of the online education platform ToneRow.com. We'll learn more about ToneRow later. Ms. Song is on the piano faculty of Mannes School of Music and teaches leadership and innovation at the Juilliard School. J.Y., welcome. Thank you, and welcome back, I should say.
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me back for this webinar.
J.Y., maybe we could just start with what the initial setup is for online instruction.
Yeah, so I'm happy to revisit what we talked about last week. I know many of our audience members were in attendance last week as well. And I think the difference this time is that I'm here seated at the piano. And one of the questions that came up last week had to do with another camera angle and being able to see more than what just one angle might be able to show. So I have with me my phone that one could use a selfie stick, and this way I can show you how the setup is that I typically use for a lesson. So if I open up the view, you can essentially see the computer that I typically use for the lessons, the microphone that I have attached to the laptop, and also the speaker that I often use. And it's a very simple setup. So I think one thing that I talked about last week that I'd like to stress is that, again, I think simplicity is really key. Not only right now when we're transitioning so quickly to online teaching, but just in general, because I feel like it allows us to focus on ultimately what is important, which is that interaction between the teacher and the student, right? So I've always viewed technology as a tool. So, it's a means to an end, but it's not the purpose in and of itself of what we do. And so the more it can help us communicate well and in a meaningful way with the student, I think the better. So I like very, very simple setups. I like the visual environment to be clean, right? So without wires coming out of every corner.
JY, we need a little more volume from you if you want to bring your mic a little closer.
Okay, so I can turn up the gain a little bit. So that's what I did.
Very good.
So again, often when I speak, I just bring the microphone close to my mouth, and I feel like that can help quite a bit. And so, again, I can walk very quickly through the setup. Wi-Fi is key in terms of the clarity of the signal. We need both very good download, very good upload, right? Peripherals help. So having a good microphone truly helps. If you're a recording engineer, often an entry-level microphone is $1,000 and up. And so, and that's how important it is to have to be able to capture a great sound. So for these purposes, for online lessons, that's not necessary. And I'm very happy with microphones that can capture sound well, but not necessarily is going to be used in a studio environment.
Maybe remind us, JY, of your preferred mic.
So this particular microphone is made by Apogee. It's a company based in California, and they make very nice microphones that plug in directly into an iPad or plug into your laptop. They're very lightweight. So the reason I like this one is because I feel the sound for music is very beautiful. It's also very portable. So if I'm traveling, if I need to go somewhere else, it's very easy to carry with me. And it's essentially plug and play, right? So you plug it into your laptop and it works immediately. So it doesn't need a separate interface. It doesn't need something much more complicated. So that's what I use on the microphone side. And again, the better the microphone, the better your sound. I think there are not a million ways around that. I think that's the nature of this kind of setup. Yeah.
So how about positioning for your laptop as it relates to the keyboard? I know that everyone likes to have their laptop treble side of the piano sort of facing down the keys when they're playing.
Right. So that's how I prefer to set this up. Right. So I have the laptop on the right side. It allows, if again, I may just turn this off for a second so we focus more on what the student sees. Right. So essentially, this is how it would work. It's very easy to see hand positions. It's very easy to see if the wrist is high and low. Right. And again, most times I really do not feel the need for another camera angle. I'm very, very happy with this simple setup. I think even fingerings are very easy to see, right? And so it's very easy to explain. And I feel, there's a very limited real estate on the screen. And so the fewer components there are in some ways, the easier it is to focus on the communication.
And maybe let's talk a bit about that communication. How does it work? Do you develop a rhythm with your student about when you're playing, when the student's playing? Is it become a walkie-talkie situation, or is there a natural ebb and flow to playing and discussion and playback?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what we do in real life. I think we have conversations with the students, we listen to them play, we respond to that playing. I would say online, maybe, you may want to think about planning areas through the hour, what you might call pastures. We like to call about shorter pastures, meaning an area that you get involved in a certain type of discussion, right? And then you move to another area. And it could be that the subject matter changes. It could be that the activity that you engage in changes, right? So you could switch from, listening to pieces to maybe discussing recordings, different types of activities of that kind. Or if you're, teaching certain fundamentals, you could go from teaching sight reading or theory and then moving on to the piece itself, right? So it depends on different pastures. I think in this day and age also just trying to develop a conversation with the student really helps a lot. I think we're living through quite chaotic times. Everybody is anxious and a little restless. And I think, if I think back, my time when I was a child, I think that relationship with the teacher is such a critical one. It can help a lot with calming certain anxieties. And I think we've all played mentorship roles through the years. And I feel like the role is more important now than ever. And so what's interesting, I think, about the period that we're going through right now is that the teachers themselves are going through a lot. Right? So it's not just the student sharing possible challenges with the teacher, but I think both ends are going through a similar similar challenges. And so I think, again, the focus for me is always on the lesson itself, on that communication. Am I reaching the student? What are possibly the challenges that they are facing, and how can I enable that process? And it's incredible that we're in a time where video conferencing is at such a level that one can transition with virtually no hiccup, right?
Sure.
It's this was unimaginable even 10 years ago. I think the challenges there were immense on the tech side.
But that's an important point that you bring up, that no matter the technology, that the teacher is also serving a mentor role, whether in person or whether online. And we said it in our previous webinar, but I'll say it again. Just have patience. Don't think that you're going to come out of the gate with no hiccups, and it's okay, and we'll all get there together. So just one technical question that we already have here that I think is appropriate for what we're discussing. Audience member asks, when the mic is on the piano, I find that every time the student touches the piano, it sounds like a bass drum. Can you recommend a setup where the mic is not on the piano?
Right, so if you can see here, I'll turn this back on.
Mm-hmm.
So I really do not recommend putting the microphone on the piano, because especially when you play, it creates vibrations. So you want to do everything possible to minimize those vibrations. And so here I have it off the piano on a music stand, and I also play cloth to separate the microphone from the music stand. Right? I do that also with the laptop, although that's less critical, but I feel anything that reduces buzzes and metal against metal sonorities, I think is very helpful. I also have the microphone in a different location of the speaker. So one thing that tends to happen online is that feedback loop. And if you have the sound from your speakers feeding directly back into the microphone, it can create a loop. So that's the challenge with using just the built-in microphone and speaker, because they're very close on your laptop, they're very close on your iPad, and so that's where you get much more echo. So the minute you separate out one of those components, right, you can have either a speaker or a microphone, already the sound is much more stable.
Okay, that's good. Another question that I think goes along with our initial setup is, how do I start up a new student for online piano instruction? So if you have a student that you've never given an online lesson to, what advice do you give him? What gear do you suggest that he or she start with?
Yeah, so that's a great question, actually. And I feel, so much of my role nowadays is troubleshooting and going through the tech with students. And so I think the more advice you can give on that front, the better. And again, both sides learn as we go, right? So it's not perfect the first time. But, I would suggest, using a laptop or a tablet, right? Rather than a phone. I think it's very easy to simply gravitate towards a phone because it's with us at all times. But it's very hard to get a consistent sound on a phone. Also, the screen is very small, so one tends to see less. So I would use a laptop or an iPad or a tablet of some kind. I would keep the software relatively simple, right? So again, there are several platforms out there. I would test them maybe with a friend ahead of time to see which one is easier to use. I think every platform comes with a different set of features. And in the initial stages, it could be the simpler the connection, the easier, and that's really how you want to communicate with the student. If you're used to making calls on FaceTime, keep using FaceTime, right? Because that's one less hurdle to overcome than both sides learning a new software. And maybe where you can improve the sound is simply adding peripherals. You can add a microphone, you can add a speaker, and then already the environment is better. I'm going to stress Wi-Fi one more time, because I think that's where I've experienced the most hurdles. I mean, if the sound is very choppy, it freezes a lot, I feel like Wi-Fi is really the place to invest some energy into. And that means either increasing the tier by calling your provider, or it means asking other people on the Wi-Fi to not use it while you're giving a lesson. And same thing for the student, right? They have to also communicate to their household that they're in a lesson and they need to use all the bandwidth for that lesson. I recommend restarting your computer before the lesson and closing all your apps, all the tabs that you may have open on the same browser. Again, anything that pulls bandwidth, even your mail programs, right? They're constantly pulling emails in the background. So close all of that. put your phone on airplane mode since you're not using it, right? So your phone is not also using Wi-Fi in the background. Anything you can do to minimize the load will help the lesson environment.
That's absolutely true. I can tell you that even with this first webinar, I was experiencing some lag, and so I followed your own advice. My phone is off. I took a lot of garbage off my desktop before this webinar. I restarted right before. I restarted my router, and I think we're already doing better than we were last time. Here's a logistical question. Do you have students call you at the beginning of the lesson, or do you call them at the appointed hour? Seems like a small detail, but I think probably an important one.
Well, the software I use, Tonro, we schedule ahead of time. So at the prescribed time, we simply enter the lesson video. So
you sort of enter that meeting together.
Right, it's scheduled.
Just as you would with Zoom, although I would assume someone would host and someone
Right, so I think Zoom works differently in that you invite another participant. And you can invite ahead of time, and the student would find that email and then click on it at the appointed hour.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. If it's a call, again, you can set your own rules, right? If you're a FaceTime call, you can ask the student to wait until you call them because maybe you're tied up in the previous lesson. You can just set up the way you're going to operate moving forward.
Let's see. Now, there was another question about Zoom. I know you're also a bit of a Zoom expert. What's the best way to sort of maximize Zoom's audio abilities as far as the setup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar. Again, I think Zoom has certain settings. So again, Zoom, like many of these platforms, are optimized for the speaking voice. Right, and those come with a very different set of requirements. Generally, it's not favorable to have big dynamic ranges, big frequency ranges. So they have all kinds of settings to limit that. And it's very, very helpful to have compression because then we have less noise, we have less echo. The communication transmits much more quickly over Wi-Fi. So there are clear benefits to compression. Now, for what we do in music, we prefer uncompressed sound because we get more detail, we get a warmer sound. There's more information that has to pass, right? But that then creates other difficulties. That's where Wi-Fi is so important because there's so much information being communicated in real time in both directions. Right? So this is not a trivial tech exercise in a sense. So I think Zoom has certain settings that one can go into. I can perhaps share some links after the webinar where you can turn on original sound, which releases some of these compressions. They may have some other settings also buried more deeply that one can investigate. But I would say just by using peripherals, sometimes I will override some of these built-in settings. So again, using a microphone such as this helps to override some of these auto gain settings that one might have on the computer or have within the software. And the sound is just much more stable.
JY, can you give us an example since we're on Zoom now? Could you play something on the piano and let us hear with your setup?
Right, so let me turn the camera a little bit. So. So I don't know how it sounds on the other end. I actually do not.
Pretty good.
Lessons, but yeah.
That's great. So maybe we move now to speaking about your online education platform, Tonro. Maybe you could talk about Tonro and tell us what specifically you look to provide with that platform. And yeah. I would use your mic a little closer. We're still getting some feedback that you're a little soft.
Okay, all right, happy to keep it close. Maybe actually a good place to start is just to show that little video clip that we have of a violin teacher teaching a student. I think the premise of Tonro was very much to help connect teachers with students and help students find a great teacher for them. So it was not intended as a background video conferencing service. It's just we happen to use video conferencing as the tool through which teachers and students can communicate. So it's a different kind of premise in the sense that teachers are presented on the site, right? We make efforts to present them well in a very professional manner. They have their studio online and gathered in one place. All the lessons are recorded. They can track the students' development over time. So it serves much more that kind of purpose. And I think the motivation for it was, as bandwidth was getting fast enough, all of a sudden there was a possibility to have these meaningful interactions with people in very, very different locations around the world. And if we think back to the history of music lessons, that was never possible prior to this time, right? Lessons were very, very local. And students historically go to the teacher's house. It's that very personal one-on-one interaction. But we felt that that one-on-one interaction could now happen at a distance. So that's the premise of this site. And essentially, I'm happy to screen share if that works.
Sure. Yeah, let's give it a try.
Just to give a sense of how the platform functions.
はい。山さん、はいはい。横のライト光ってます？カメラの。
わかりました。
この間、朝の5時にっていうふうに来ましたから。
そうですよね。
Now, I'm going to talk only about left hand on purpose right now, okay? We also need to talk about right hand, but for the moment, we're just going to talk about left hand. 3 and 4 are naturally a little bit weak, right? Okay. Now, take a look at where my thumb is. Not this, but and then you just do this, and that's it, right? Yes, that's it. You're already perfect. I know I told you I was going to talk about left hand and not right hand, but I want to talk about your face, okay? I know you're beautiful, but look, I'm looking at you like you are the music. This is what I would do, okay? Do you see? My nose is pointing down D string. The shape stays the same. Good. So practice well, and I'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Okay, so that's the clip. Let me just make sure it's, yeah. So I enjoy watching that every time because I feel like they seem to have a very close connection between the two. And Ray uses the camera very imaginatively. So he doesn't stand in a fixed position relative to the camera. He's often leaning into it. He shows different angles. And of course, with the violin, it's much easier, right? He's much more mobile than we are at the piano. But I think that creative use of the camera makes it very easy to communicate his thoughts to the student. And the other piece I like a lot about this video is that the student is fully engaged. Right? She has no difficulty understanding what he's saying. She seems quite amused by what he says, and she seems very eager to learn. And I feel like, again, it shows that it's possible to have these meaningful interactions through video conferencing, in terms of learning music. And I think it opens up a lot of possibilities that way.
So just to be clear, most of our teachers are going to be fine just going through Zoom and starting their lessons there, just as we're speaking through Zoom now.
Yeah,
what do you do with parents when you're trying to convince them of the ability to actually get a lesson done online, that even in the time of Corona, what are the talking points when pitching parents and students as to the value and feasibility of online lessons?
Well, I think the first thing, everybody now is used to having conversations through video conferencing, right? We all make calls on FaceTime. And I think, unfortunately, we seem to be in a period where this, stay-at-home phase may extend for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important to keep students engaged and to keep them learning, to keep them motivated, right? And I think there's a certain urgency now more than ever, to keep that relationship going. And again, in the early phases to bring them on, it may not be as simple as saying, let's have an online lesson. It could be just maintaining that relationship with the student by sending them videos, by sending them things to listen to, so that that they're still thinking about music, they're still learning some aspects, and then eventually that could progress to having an actual lesson online. But I don't think it's such a big gap. You could also give them propose it as an experience, right? Let's see if it can work. And I think the only thing that really maybe is does not encourage people to move to this online space is that fear that the sound is not good enough. And again, right. That first time one does it, often it really does not sound good. And it's for all these reasons we've been talking about since last week, right? It's the Wi-Fi speed, it's the accessories, it's being on the phone, it's walking around, having a lot of people in the house making noises during the lesson. And so all of that, I think, detracts a little bit. And it could be that's why it's so important to have a good setup. Right, a simple setup, but one that works comfortably, and then to explain that setup to the student so that that first contact is as good as possible. One thing we've been doing a lot at Tonro is giving demos to new teachers and then giving demos even to the students, because we notice if the teacher and student connect alone first, often it may not work that well. But as soon as we understand what equipment are the students using and how can we adjust the lighting, how can we adjust the sound, then suddenly that first interaction is very positive. And if that first interaction is positive, it opens up, again, a lot more long-term possibilities.
Another logistical question, does the student need to have a separate mic as well on their end?
So I would say the student does most of the playing, so it's very important for the student's sound to be good. And so, yes, in some ways I feel the speaker is more important on the teacher's side and the microphone is more important on the student's side. But in reality, teachers do both, right? Most teachers play as well, and you want the student to hear that sound in the best possible way, because so much of the training, again, has to do with listening to beautiful sounds. So you want that sound to communicate. And again, the better the microphone, the better the quality of that sound.
I imagine there are special challenges to teaching technique and dynamics online. Can you speak to that?
Actually, so that's one interesting area. I mean, again, I feel that there's really no gap. And dynamics do convey well, again, depending on the setup, right? One can hear very easily loud and soft. One can hear phrasing extremely well. One can hear, of course, timing extremely well. So I don't know that there is such a gap. Technique, again, with those camera angles, you can explain in quite some detail. You can even show things with arm drops if that's what you happen to be working on. And I know that has a lot to do with feeling, right? So often one would support the students' arms to try to get them to feel that weight, but you can also demonstrate, right? And you can use different ways to show those types of techniques. When it comes to finger technique, it's extremely clear, right? You can see, it's very much in sync. So this was one of the difficulties early on with online lessons, is that the visual part and the sound might get out of sync. But I feel like right now that's much less of an issue. So if you play a simple scale, and even if it's fast, you can see that the notes coincide with the sound. So you can talk about fingers moving, you can talk about that synchronization of sound and motion, right? There are many, many things you can address. You can talk about fingering, right? So again, if it's helpful to have another camera angle, right, to show fingering in detail, certainly that's possible.
Let's revisit those camera angles, JY. I know you showed us at the beginning, but let's revisit again how you have cameras set up.
Right, so for instance, if you want to show what Molly was talking about last week, put the microphone on the keyboard, but again, if you want the above angle, right? You can do this and show slightly more complicated fingerings, right? Let's say thirds. Right? So that can be quite easy to follow. Right? And so the student can see, where the fingers are sliding, where the coordination happens. So there's really, again, no gap there at all. And in some ways, they can see even closer than they might in real life, right? Because they're very focused. And that's, again, one area in terms of just in terms of just the engagement aspect. I find that students are really quite engaged online, right? Because the screen is a defined area.
Exactly.
Usually the camera is very close, and so there isn't that sense that there's a lot of distractions around. Actually, we're much more focused on the lesson, while it's happening. So generally, I think that all of those are very much positives in the online teaching.
So a couple quick more technical questions. What's the name of that tripod that's holding the phone?
I'll have to find that out. I forgot at the moment, but I'm happy to send a link later on.
Okay, we'll send that in our follow-up audience.
Okay.
Also, one teacher is concerned with requiring their students to purchase a mic. Is there a platform? Of course, the sound quality without mics is tricky in a lot of platforms. Is there a platform that has decent sound quality without an additional mic?
So I would say, again, it has more to do with the equipment. So a lot of the newer laptops and the newer iPads do have better microphones, right? So if that device is newer, I think that's very helpful. The built-in cameras are fantastic. So that's where, again, I don't feel the need to have an external camera. So maybe that will help. So the way to improve the sound there would be to use headphones, right? So many people do have headphones at home, and that way you can separate out the speaker from the microphone. So just use the built-in microphone that you have and separate out the speakers, and that should help quite a bit.
Do you recommend using a whiteboard or other types of visual aids to help teach rhythm and fingering?
Sure. So again, if that's what you do in a live lesson, right, you have a notebook and you're writing rhythms, especially if there's a theory component to your lessons, then whiteboarding helps a lot. If not, I wouldn't suddenly add that on as a new form of communication unless you find it particularly helpful.
Okay, very good. Let's see, I'm just going through some questions here. What do you do for pieces that you've assigned to students that you don't have at hand? How do you do sight reading?
So I actually I do have a tablet, and especially now I have a lot of the scores that I need on the tablet. So if I can download the score from the internet, I'm able to use it on the tablet. So, my personal preference is to have a paper score when I read music, and certainly when I learn music, that's what I tend to use. But I'm very happy to use a tablet as well for music. So that's an easy way to access a lot of scores if you don't have them ready at hand.
Teachers want to know if there's a cost to join Tone Row.
No, there is no cost to joining Tone Row, so you can simply join the faculty, create a profile. So yeah, on that front, there's no cost to join.
Okay. Well, thank you, JY. Do you have anything else that you'd like to finish with?
Well, I mean, just again that, I want to encourage everybody to do this. I know that in the initial phase it might seem a little challenging, but I have no doubt that every single person can teach very successfully online. And again, as I mentioned last week, the benefits are so tangible, right? And not only at this moment in the crisis, but long term, the fact that we can reach students at a distance. I would encourage everybody to be very creative during this time also. I think we're entering a period of great innovation in this space. We're in the early stages of online teaching. And just, we need to, on some levels, rethink why we teach, think back what brought us to teaching, what motivated us to teach, and find that communication and share it with others online. And I'm sure there will be many creative developments from everyone listening here and many others who are teaching, who will discover ways to teach over the coming months. So, you know, for better or for worse, every moment of crisis generates a lot of invention, you know, and and I think we're absolutely in one of those moments. You know, we're all engaged in this at the same time, and so keep exploring, keeping imaginative with how you teach, keep thinking about how you're teaching, how you're communicating, and I think good things will happen down the road.
And I know it's a scary jump, teachers, but I just urge you to take it. You have a laptop, you have Zoom, give it a try. Get whatever microphone solution you have handy. Give it a try. Start doing it, and then as you do it, you'll find problems, you'll find solutions, you'll find questions. You can come to our community for answers. We're going to keep these webinars going. No one has anywhere to go because we can't go anywhere. So I think it's an exciting option for all of us who are homebound at the moment. I'm very sorry that we haven't been able to address all the questions. We have a couple, almost 70 here, but we will be sending out some information to you. This webinar will also be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back or share it with colleagues as you desire. And all webinar recordings and additional supplemental materials will be available to you after the webinar. So just a reminder that Steinway will be hosting our next webinar on Wednesday, April 8 at 2 p.m. Eastern. This will be a masterclass by Steinway artist Christopher O'Reilly, classical pianist and arranger, former host of the National Public Radio show From the Top. Please complete the 2-minute survey after the conclusion of this webinar to let us know which additional topics you would like to see us cover in the future. So thank you so much, JY. Thank you so much again for joining us. Please check out her education platform, ToneRow, ToneRow.com. See what she has going on over there. Please try a lesson, do a trial lesson with one of your students, see how it goes, see what sort of connection you can make in this day and time where it is difficult to connect with others. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you're all now more confident in your abilities to give online piano instruction than you were when this webinar began. I'm sure you are. I would like to remind everyone, wherever you are, to stay healthy, stay home, until we next meet online or in real life. On behalf of Steinway Sons, I am Ben Finane, and I remain musically yours. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.